So I'm going to go ahead and jump in on this slide. Thank you, Cecily. Since we are talking about transformation, I want us to be able to have an open conversation and share the stuff that we write in the chat with one another. I just wanted to start at the top with a little word about content. So in this workshop, we are going to discuss some of the harder cards in the tarot deck, or cards that are thought of as the scary cards. So we may discuss topics such as death, birth, injury, illness, loss of a loved one, or oppression. And I've done my best to identify any triggering subject matter that may come up. But when discussing difficult moments, if we can just please proceed with care for ourselves and for others, that is a high priority for us tonight. All right. So I'm going to start us off with a little quote from, this is a passage from a book of prose poems. The author's name is Dulce Maria Loinaz. She was a Cuban poet who passed away, I think, in the early 2000s, and she was in her 90s. So her work was only recently translated into English, and I find it really beautiful. We're going to dig into a couple of her pieces in this class. But to start us off, I want to go ahead and read this piece for y'all from her book, aptly titled Absolute Solitude. There are many who pass straight through life because they never turn to face the winds. And there are others who bend like a bow to find their balance in the storm. And there are still others who project themselves beyond, through the wind, shot forth on the sharp, quivering arrow within. So that is a passage from Absolute Solitude. Highly recommend that book if y'all enjoy the pieces that I share with you tonight. Definitely look her up. So we're going to kind of meditate on that for a moment before we move on to our sort of introductory writing exercise to get us warmed up. Here we go. So as we talk about transformation tonight, really what we're talking about is change. And change, I think the difference between change and transformation is that change is happening to us all the time. We are in perpetual states of change, even on a cellular level. And when we talk about transformation, we're really talking about changes that we are active in rather than passive. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But for now, I want us to just take a moment. Go ahead and grab your writing utensils. We're going to write for a few minutes. Take a moment to reflect on a time in your life when you underwent a personal change, whether it was subtle and small or drastic and deep. And I want us to think about how our mind reacts to changes. And then we'll move into how does the body react when change becomes inevitable. We'll write for about 7 minutes. if you haven't already moved on to the second half of the prompt, go ahead and do so now. Thinking about what happens internally when change becomes inevitable. Some of us might resist it or thrive on it or something else. All right. If you're still working, maybe start wrapping it up. We would love to hear from you. If something came through in that little opening exercise, please feel free to share it with us in the chat. These are some strange times, so I feel like we've all been through some changes lately.
We have a note from Tammy that she recently had a large change, a new job, a new state, all right before this new extra global change arrived.
Wow.
Tammy, I'd be curious how it felt as you were moving through it at the beginning. Terry writes that my whole life has been full of changes, and once upon a time I was filled with worry and fear. Now, amazingly, during COVID-19, I have never been calmer or more at peace with changes.
Wow.
Yeah, this is producing some unexpected sensations that range all over the place.
Yeah, definitely.
Jess writes, my life has always been chaotic, and last year was super chaotic. This year I've been very ill and getting very quiet. So that would be a big change. We hope that you're okay, Jess.
Yeah. I love the getting very quiet. I feel like that's something that comes up a lot in a lot of the cards we're going to talk about as a kind of strategy.
Tammy chimes back in about the changing states and changing jobs. She says she instigated the change and it was more toward the ideal life that she wanted for herself. I'm so thankful all the details were worked out before the pandemic. Last year was my tower year and it was full of turmoil. And 2020 has been my star.
Wow. Love those cards.
So
can't wait to.
Sorry,
go ahead. I was going to say, I can't wait to talk about those cards.
Just a couple more comments. Adrienne says she's working through changing the way she engages with her family through COVID. We've not always seen eye to eye on political issues, and this has brought that to a whole new level.
Oh yeah, I can relate to that, Adrienne, in a big way. That is one really hard angle of this experience.
And then last two comments here from Jess. She says she's okay, thanks. Chronic illness, flare-ups with COVID on top of it. It took 2 months to start really getting well. Glad to hear, Jess, that you have, that it's starting to feel maybe a little better. I'm sure all of that piled on it's just way too much. And Kara's sharing that she lost her mom at the end of March. I'm unprepared for this level of change, but I'm hopeful it will lead to transformation. And Kara, we send you some hugs for the loss of your mom.
Yes, all the love.
Yes.
And thank you for sharing with us, Kara, and everyone. I think in light of a lot of what was just shared, I'm sure a lot of us may already be thinking about the tarot in these ways, but just in case, I wanted to give y'all a note about, quote, scary tarot cards. I personally do not believe that there is a tarot card that we draw which is here to tell us that we're doomed or that bad things are coming our way. My approach as a reader of tarot for myself and for other people, and certainly as a teacher, is that all of the cards are here to reflect back to us the patterns that are taking place in our own lives and to provide us with a little bit of guidance for how to move through those patterns. I think the scary cards do depict very difficult moments in our lives, but they offer us some of the deepest, most transformative teachings. And I will add to that also potentially healing. I really think of them as allies. And so if we draw, for example, the death card, the card I feel like most people really don't like to see, there's I think even more to be gleaned from that than, say, the 10 of Cups, depending on our situation and where we're at. All right. If we are ready to go, let's take a look at these cards. So I split the lesson up into minor and major arcana cards. We're just going to be looking at 3 minor arcana cards of transformation today. And I will note that I think any tarot card has transformative potential, and it's all based on what we're going through, where we are at in our lives. But I chose cards that I have been meditating on a lot during this time, and things that I think are just, they have like a natural transformative quality to them. So with that said, our first card is 10 of Wands. So I think that anytime we're looking at a 10, of course, our minor arcana cards go 1 through 10 in the suits. And so anytime we're in a 10, we're in kind of a transformative space, right? We're at the end of a cycle. And oftentimes that means we are about to leave something behind, or we're about to move into kind of a new pattern or a new phase. And 10 of Wands depicts this figure who is doing a pretty good job, actually. I think of it as a struggle, but it's a struggle where there's some serious aptitude here as they haul these 10 wands in this kind of awkward looking formation. So yeah, I think of this card as exploring our relationship to burden and responsibility. Typically when I see this card, I think, okay, what part of me, if I'm getting it for myself, what part of me is thinking that I have to do it all by myself? and where am I sort of overloading? And I think when this card comes up, it's life stepping in and saying, you have to put some of these wands down. When we're in wands, we're in fire energy. And even though we have a multitude of wands in the 10, there can be a depletion, a burnout that takes place in this card. I think that is something that happens in my normal life a lot. And weirdly, in this pandemic, for me in my particular situation, there's been a little bit of a reprieve from that, which has actually just brought it to my attention even more of just how overburdened the day-to-day can be. So some transformative questions that we can think about when we receive this card or when we meditate on this card are, what am I carrying that I can let go? Can I ask for what I need? Another way to think of that is, can I ask for help? If I need help, can I just put some of the wands down and ask for it? And what happens when I'm not overburdened and become available to pour my energy into something that I really care about? I will say we don't always have the ability to put the wands down. So, I still think that this card is a really great meditation on how we are spending our energy, and where we can even just give ourselves a moment of pause or a small amount of reprieve. And I definitely think that asking for help is a huge part of the sort of transformative medicine of this card. Cecily, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just, I agree that it feels like you can see the slog feeling of the card, but the excitement is that, or the one, the medicine, I guess, is that this is the end. Like, you're being asked to really make a change at this point.
Yeah. You really can't add another wand, even if you wanted to.
Right. The only way to go is less, fewer.
Yeah.
None.
Katie says, I always see this card as being almost there and almost done with a huge amount of work that you've been doing. I agree, Katie. I feel like that's part of the transformation of any 10 too, is we're just really sort of in a culmination of what we've been, again, pouring our fire energy into for a time. And it may feel great. Maybe you really feel like you're juggling everything just the way it should be, but we go in cycles. And so sometimes it's nice to know when you're in a 10 that this particular cycle may be ending, and it gives us the wherewithal to kind of keep our eyes open for what's coming next. All right. So in that same line of thought, we have the 10 of Swords, a much more sinister image in the Smith Rider-Waite. So in this card, I think the words that typically come to mind for me when I see it are anxiety, maybe even depression. It's intense mental, sometimes pain or discomfort. Somehow our mental patterns have accumulated into something that is affecting us to the point of immobility. And that's not to say we can't get out of bed, although sometimes for sure it means that. But a kind of mental immobility, right? Where you really feel stuck in a particular cycle, I think, in this card, more so than other 10s. And I think it's easy to get stuck in this card. It's easy to feel pinned down, like the figure on the image, in these kind of heavy mental patterns without the motivation to be able to begin another cycle. So the transformative potential here, as I see it, is to be able to shed those harmful patterns of thought so that we can open ourselves up to a new perspective. That is so much easier said than done. I think what this card is asking us is to really just take a deep look at what is my thought patterning, right? What is this kind of rut that I feel that I'm in? Instead of just feeling immobilized by it, asking what happens when I just sit and examine this fear or this anxiety or this depression, and how can it actually be my doorway into moving on to this next phase? And, that's not to say that like sitting with your anxiety is going to make it go away. I think it's more about learning about it, right? And so you can better assess like what it is that you need to move forward. And maybe that's like therapy, or maybe it's just like tying up like a loose end, like calling your mom and making sure that she knows that you didn't mean that last thing you said, or whatever the case may be. I think that really sort of facing this, whatever this crippling mental pattern is, I think that's what this card is asking us to do, which is a really transformative act, and does require bravery, I would say. Cecily, do you have anything on this card?
I'm just noticing, maybe for the first time, how huge these swords are. I think compared to what else, everything else we see in the image. And
Yeah.
swords are always teaching us something that I think it's easy for us to forget, that our thoughts have an incredible amount of power over our lives. And, since they're just running through our mind, we don't often notice them. But, like in the 8 of Swords, and then as you move up to the 10, you really see how debilitating they can be if they're kind of spinning out of control.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, they're a little bit ridiculous. They're larger than life swords. Yeah, just like our thoughts can be.
Katie's mentioning that she noticed for the first time that the figure's hand is making the same hand signal as the hand of the Hierophant. So that's something we can mull over down the road.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's hard for me to tell what that shape is, but I'm very intrigued by that. I'll definitely want to look into that.
Kind of reminds us that this is a message to pay attention to, like the Hierophant is the teacher with a message, and maybe that's some echo. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And one last thing about the card that I think is interesting on a visual level is we seem to have either night falling or dawn rising. And I don't think you can tell which one it is. But in either case, it sort of supports that idea of the 10 as being this sort of close of something, whether that's night falling on this particular phase, or the hopefulness of dawn, a new dawn. Yeah, I definitely think that sort of that transitional phase of day is pretty important. All right. And then our third minor card, the 8 of Cups. So first off, I'll say, I've heard a lot of people talk about this card in terms of breakups or leaving a relationship. And I don't think that's wrong. I think it maybe is too particular. And so I think this card holds just a lot more, that and more for sure. So certainly in this card, the time has come to leave. That's one thing we can't refute. This figure has a stack of 8 cups, and they are walking away from their stack. And I think of it as leaving behind the comfort of what is known for the discomfort of the journey through the mountains toward the unknown, right? That's kind of a motif, not just in a tarot, but in a lot of spiritual paths and philosophies. That path through the mountains is scary and treacherous, and certainly symbolizes a kind of discomfort that we walk through. So yeah, I think those cups they can be small things, you know. It doesn't have to be a relationship that we're leaving. It can be anything that we have an emotional attachment to, right? That can be my things, my patterns of behavior, you know. I guess a kind of lame example would be like my cigarettes. Like I walk away from this, even though it's not just about a physical addiction. It's about this sort of like emotional attachment. And I think in this card, the potential for transformation is not just the walking away, but being able to sense when what we are emotionally attached to is no longer in alignment with us, even if it's still providing comfort, right? So it's not like, oh, this is terrible, I'm leaving. It's like, no, this is still somewhat comforting to me, but I recognize that my path is leading in a different direction. And so I have to leave it behind. So there again is that choice. It's not just changes happening to us, right? Maybe this situation was going to end anyway at some point, but the figure has taken an action and chosen to move towards, in this case, the mountains and the moon. And I just wanted to add, I think there's a cool visual connection to the moon card, which we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. But in this card, the moon looks very somber and its eyes are sort of pointing in the direction in which the figure walks. So I think that kind of also supports the idea that there's cosmic significance to this choice. It's not just I'm no longer happy here choice.
Yeah, I love this card. This is one of my favorite cards, I think, because I want to believe that I possess this ability, but I'm not sure that I do. And I think the courage, this like particular kind of courage that's depicted in this card, where it's not a like if you walk away from something that's like a total dumpster fire, everyone's like, yeah, oh, I get it. But if it's pretty, okay, except for you, it's not enhancing your growth, and you say no anyway, like that's super special courage. So I really love it.
Yeah. And I love that the figure in the card looks, they have a walking stick and they're sort of dressed to go on a walkabout. Like they have a parka or something and boots to withstand the elements. So I think of them as like a traveler and someone who's interested in the path, like I say at the bottom of the slide, of quiet, gentle discovery, right? Like they're also just curious about what else there is and not staying in a state of comfort. Okay, so we have a lot of major arcana cards that we're going to talk about, so let's get into it. I think there's a connection, by the way, between the Eight of Cups and the Hermit. Both of them have walking sticks, and they're both going, I think, at different levels of altitude into the mountains. So let's talk about the Hermit. We kind of have this little sweet moment with the Hermit before we dive into some of the other cards. The thing that has really come to my mind lately as being of the most importance with the Hermit is that the lantern can only illuminate what is just before us. The Hermit card is one of moving slowly and guided by the direction of the lantern, which I really believe is our soul's light. Notice that inside the lantern is not just a flame, but it is a star. So also connecting it to the star card. This is also a card of drawing inward and reflecting that helps us develop some self-knowledge. So there is a little bit of perhaps isolation, something we can all relate to right now to some degree. And even when you're not an isolated person physically, that's what this card is calling forward for us, is a drawing inward. So like I said, there's this mountain imagery. I think of the Hermit as being somewhere up in the mountains. You see that snow at his feet. So as we move up the mountain in the symbolic journey for enlightenment, but really it is a journey leading us to a deeper connection to ourselves. And the transformative potential here is in following the path lit by our soul, so to speak. We have to reflect on what we really feel like our purpose is and our higher calling, which can be totally life-changing. You know, our day-to-day is not going to be perhaps bringing that forward for us in any practical sense. And so when we're in a hermit phase, we're really being asked to examine what we want to do with our lives, which is huge. All right. The Hanged Man, or the Hanged One, depending on your deck. I think this card is naturally transformative. We have a figure that is upside down. So we're being revealed, or excuse me, as it can reveal to us a radical shift in perspective. The energy in the Hanged Man is about staying present in the moment, even when it's deeply uncomfortable. I think that in the Hanged Man, we are kind of engaging with a body, mind, soul trio all at once when it comes to change. I was telling Cecily a while ago when we were talking about this class that I think our bodies, minds, and souls are always kind of shifting and changing to make room for each other. And in the Hanged Man, I feel like there's something about that nimbus around the head stating something about the mind being involved here in staying present in this perhaps mentally or spiritually or bodily uncomfortable moment, right? Depending on what our situation is. It's important that the Hanged Man is kind of in a reclining posture and hanging voluntarily. So they're seeking enlightenment. Another way to think of enlightenment would just be a transformation of the soul. And so once again, we're kind of sacrificing comfort in this card. Okay. Everybody's favorite, the Death card. I really do love this card, though. It's certainly not all about actual death. I think the best analogy I've heard for this card is that of the controlled burn. In the Death card, we are really clearing something out of our lives. You can see that the writer, Death, is writing through and just wreaking havoc on these people. Everything in their path is being kind of mowed down. And so the analogy of the controlled burn is that we're clearing something out of our lives so that something new will have an opportunity to take root and eventually grow. So this is that kind of difficult process of experiencing loss, no matter what you're clearing, even if it's just a small thing, or if it's something that's being cleared from your life. And in an example, it would be like a relationship. What's important to recognize is that release, even if it's a welcome one, can be very painful. So I think our transformative potential here is that for us to step aside and allow what is not meant to go with us to be released, to allow that process to take place, but also to just learn to sit and be with the feelings that flood in after a loss, and not necessarily try to give them some reprieve. Because to be able to sit with the loss of the Death card is, I think, its biggest medicine for us, to feel that clearing out, which naturally gives rise to the new growth.
Claire, I love how describing all of these. I saw a comment from Adrian that I wanted to circle back to real quick. And I think it makes a lot of sense with this card as well. She's asking about that concept of differentiating the body and the mind and the soul competing for space. And when we were talking, Claire and I, about that last night, one way I think about it is how they all have like the body, the mind, and the soul might have its own energetic wavelength or energetic field. And sometimes they can vibrate on the same kind of like
Mm.
resonant pattern, but sometimes they're off. And I think with the death card as well as the hanged man, we experience this energy on body, mind, and soul level. Like a loss is really
Yeah,
affecting the soul too, especially for, with loved ones or something like that. But maybe say more about that, Claire.
absolutely. Yeah, I guess the idea is just that. So, like I said at the top, we're always changing in subtle ways, whether we're enacting that change on purpose or we're even aware of it or not. And so I started to think about the idea of the body, and the mind and the soul all reacting to change in life and changing themselves, and sort of all shifting, um, taking up space in different ways. So sometimes it's like my body is in pain, right? I have chronic back pain. And so whatever my soul desperately needs, which is like, to take care of itself in certain ways, right? Just the basics of self-care. I can't do it because my body is really screaming and taking up all the space in my life. So yeah, I think in certain cards we are maybe tuning in a little bit more to one of those sort of human faculties, body, mind, or soul, which are sort of competing for space and attention. And that's kind of the transformative potential of all the cards, right? Is that they're allowing us to kind of, and that's kind of what I mean about sitting with the feelings of loss. That feeling just feels, it just feels bad. You can't differentiate between the three sometimes. Like you feel it in your body just as much as you feel it in your emotions and your soul. And so I think that over time, learning to sit and be with those feelings is what helps us kind of understand them. And yeah, I think that can be hugely transformative in moving through and past eventually. But yeah, is that wait?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
that's wonderfully, wonderfully said. Thank you.
Cool. So the tower. Wow, we're in a tower time. Let's just say it. We are in a tower time collectively. It's not about whether or not we draw this card. It's like a really good time to think about it. And to that point, I have been pulling this card a lot for, I've pulled it for myself. I've pulled it for a client. It's popping up. And the difference between Death and the Tower, they're similar. But I think that in the Tower, you look at the image, we have fire and brimstone, right? We have lightning, which is taking this tower down. The universe is stepping in, life is stepping in to renovate our lives. Whatever false structures that we've been building up and leaning on, and we've really been like sort of formatting our lives to, are something in there is getting torn down. Sometimes it's just a little bit of part of the structure. Sometimes it's all of it has to be torn down and rebuilt. And by false structure, I guess I just mean whatever is no longer true to us, right? So it can be really unsettling because we don't seem to have a choice in this happening. When it is happening, tower kind of happens to us more than it is something we invoke. Again, I point out the pandemic. It's not something that we are causing, so to speak. It is something that is happening beyond our control. So, the card is asking us to look at what we are aligned with that is no longer true for us. What have we built? And I'll say my biggest experience with this card so far in my life has been, up until now, pulling it on repeat when I knew it was time for me to leave a job that was killing me. And I eventually did and stopped drawing the tower card as much. But that was my big tower time. Was I had built this job up in my life so big, it had really taken over, and it was not okay for me in any way. That's just a small example of what the tower can be. Not necessarily so much fire and brimstone, but it's definitely one that I think is worthy of our attention right now. And I'm still learning about this, I'm still learning about the tower. I think that it's important for us to remember that we do have a choice in whether or not we resist or surrender. I think that's what's happening with the two figures. We have one person that seems to be clutching at the air as they fall, and one person that's in just a little bit of a more a blissful free fall, and letting the thing just come down. I don't know that one is necessarily easier than the other, but I definitely think of the tower, as a lesson in what do we resist and where can we soften and surrender a little bit more. Cecily, what do you think about the tower?
I could probably talk for hours. I think you've said many great things about it. It's like the Eight of Cups, but it's like you didn't do the Eight of Cups, you know? And so the tower is waiting for you. Like it's going to need to change so that your life can keep growing. But
Yeah.
what kind of relationship do you want to have? How much do you want to participate to the change that you do probably realize is necessary?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think of it as a punishment for us.
No, I don't mean it in that way, but
No, I didn't think you did, but I definitely don't see it when I do receive it or acknowledge that I'm moving through it. I don't think of it as a punishment for not having seen this sooner. It's just a fact of life that, these structures are built by us, and they cannot all, live in perpetuity.
yeah, and I think we have phases of life, and you know, there's going to be a big shift between those phases, no matter what, and so that we can grow
Yeah.
into the next phase smoothly. And it feels so uncomfortable because it's unknown. You know, even just like becoming a mother, for example, would be having the
Yeah.
tower kind of come through for your independence and kind of dismantle that so that you can have this very rich and amazing experience as a parent.
Totally. Katie said in the chat, I always think about the yods in this card. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I never know.
Yeah.
Which point to it being an act of God. And yes, I totally agree. I think that those are there for a reason. That's part of why I think of it as, like I said, the universal life stepping in to renovate, as opposed to us maybe choosing the tower. What is a yod? Terry asks. As I understand it, they're like the divine, oh God.
It's a Hebrew letter, and then I believe it represents the connection to God.
They're definitely, yeah. I guess in my mind, what I was about to say is they're like little divine sparks.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
yes, it's the yellow flecks.
Right.
Yeah.
You'll see them throughout the tarot. They rain and sprinkle in a lot of different cards.
Yeah, they definitely alert us to that sort of divine dimension being at play in the card. So the great thing about the tower is the very next card in the tarot, in the major arcana, as they go in a numerical sequence, is the star. And this is the card that is sort of the promise of the tower, is that right after that phase, and your illusion has fallen away, we are stripped down to sort of the essence of who we are, to only what is true. And so we see the naked figure, right? In nature. No, there is no visible human structure in sight. Speaking of divinity, I believe that the little bird is also meant to be a divine messenger in a traditional tarot interpretation. I just love that the bird is there. There's so much water being poured everywhere. Water is certainly a symbol of spirit and the internal realm. And so my sort of interpretation of this card is that the star is a reflection pool. I think that the figure is looking at themselves in the pool, in which we see our truest selves, and we can explore the wildest depths of our soul at peace. I think that's important too. There's total peace in the star. This is also coming after the Tower. It is a healing spring where we can allow the lessons that we've learned to kind of start to nourish us, and put a salve on our wounds. So definitely the transformative potential here is to heal and nourish. So it's like the change has already taken place, and now it's time that we, in the star, we acclimate to what this new self is, right? Okay, I discovered that I had a really harmful pattern of behavior, and I've gone through a tower phase with it, right? And it's sort of been time for me to grow up around this one issue in my life. Now I have to kind of learn how to be myself again after that sort of drastic transformation, or I have to learn how to live without this person in my life now, or whatever the change may be. And the star is sort of that healing pool that helps us acclimate. And that's basically saying that you have to allow yourself to exist in the star for a while. You have to allow yourself to kind of do some soul searching. What do you think, Cecily?
Yeah, I love everything that you described for this card. And I will say that when I do readings and people pull the Tower, I almost 100% of the time get out the star and talk about, there's two parts to this deal. And it isn't just like everything falls apart and that's it. There's space is being made for parts of yourself that you're not in connection with right now to come and really astonish you and enrich your life. And I like that she's nude here. She's really embracing a new kind of authenticity without hesitation or without self-consciousness.
Yeah. I like that. All right. I'm thinking the moon has been perhaps very present for a lot of us lately as well. This is a card that took me a while to feel like I could touch in with in a meaningful way personally. I read, I think, a little too much about all the symbology on the card, which is cool, but perhaps can be distracting. There are more of those little yods you'll see. So there's a connection to the Tower in the moon. So the moon is the card of the subconscious, the realm of dreams and nightmares. I think once I discovered that and really felt that I knew that to be true, this card really opened up for me. And I will say, in terms of the symbology, one of the things I read, Rachel Pollack talks about it in her book, 78 Degrees of Wisdom, is that the little crustacean is like one of our fears popping up out of the water of our subconscious. I really, really love that. I think there's lots of ways you can look at the creatures in this card, but doing work with the subconscious is very naturally transformative because we don't get to just be with our subconscious most of the time. It's not even really accessible to us most of the time unless we are dreaming. And it can be extremely difficult because that is also where a lot of our deep-seated fears exist. So yeah, we're often facing our deepest fears in this card, or the parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at. Also in the subconscious, there's a lack of linear narrative and time. Our conscious mind doesn't get to superimpose those things on our feelings and our thoughts and all of the other things that kind of eke out of our subconscious. And so we can feel very lost. I mean, really, you have to just think about the sensation of dreaming. You feel very lost and out of control, and there's really nothing to hold on to. But even when we are awake, the subconscious is very active and very part of our minds. So I think that this card has tons of transformative potential if we can access it, in a safe, respectful way for our minds, right? And it is to be present in the unknown and in chaos that exists in our subconscious mind. And that is also to say, just in the unknown right now of like what life is and what it's going to be, right? And that's part of that is also just being able to be present with our own fears, right? Really being able to look at them in the face without trying to get away. So there can be a sweet side to the moon, but I think that the transformative part of it really comes in to play with the crustacean part, where we see our little fears and our little darknesses that we don't want to acknowledge, and we really prefer not to allow into our conscious minds. And exploring that is difficult. I mean, I think some of the best ways to do it is honestly automatic writing, meditation, but yeah, I think the moon has a lot to offer. It's a really cool card.
Yeah, and I think of that crustacean also as a reminder that we evolved from more primitive, sort of in quotes, creatures, and we still contain that part of ourselves. And
Yeah.
I kind of describe this card sometimes as if, like, when your actual life starts to feel a little bit like a dream, because there's kind of uncanny things happening, or like you might hear from an old lover strangely out of the blue, and you're kind of dropped back into that time and you don't know why now. It's very strange.
Yeah.
And I especially feel this card is so appropriate for what we're going through, because just on that time level, like, time is becoming very different for us now. And you can feel like that symptom of the moon more acutely than ever before, I think.
Yes, and fear is something that we don't really get to shove down into our subconscious as much as we usually do.
So true.
Okay, we got two more of the majors.
Real quick, Terry is suggesting a book that speaks to this and looking at fears issues, the Pima Children, When Things Fall Apart text, which is, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry. Love the recommendations.
Transformation.
Okay. I just want to take it down in case we lose the chat. And we are talking about Judgment next. Another card that I think took me the longest to really warm up to, if you will. Move my chat box so I can see it. So I like that some decks will call this card Awakening. I think that is really key, because the word judgment clearly has some other connotations in our minds. The first thing we may think of is not, the connotations are judging, being judged, and Judgment Day, which are all perhaps part of the card in small ways, but definitely not the end of what it can do or where we can go with it. So yeah, let's talk about Judgment. I love the idea of awakening, because that's something that's happening on an image level on the card, right? These corpses are waking up and being resurrected from their graves. So we have corpses that are actually responding to this trumpet call from the heavens. There's definitely, I think part of maybe what was tricky for me for a long time is the clearly biblical inspiration for the image itself. And that's not to say it's not there or not maybe a totally valid thing to notice and think about in it, but to be able to go beyond it, and to go beyond this question that the card may ask is, how do we see ourselves and others, right? That sort of that classic idea of judgment coming in. But thinking about it as a resurrection, I think what is being resurrected is highly variable depending on our situation. But one of the ways I love to think about it is parts of ourselves that we have lost somewhere along the way. So that is what this clarion call is bringing forth, is what have we forgotten, perhaps? What have we lost about ourselves along the way? In the Judgment card, we're almost through the major arcana, right? There's only one card left, which we'll talk about next. But before we can move on to that sort of phase, final phase, we have to look back at, a lot of the cards we've talked about before now have been about shedding and loss and losing. And so Judgment is kind of bringing it all back. And that's not to say it's like, hey, you forgot about this. Don't forget to bring this with you. It's really just allowing you to pause and look at the changes that have already taken place, the transformations you've already enacted. And sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, I stopped writing a long time ago, and I really miss that part of myself, and I want to bring it back. That certainly can be part of the transformative potential of the card. And sometimes it's just good to take stock, I think. In any case, we're looking at what has been lost and forgotten, and we have to choose what goes with us and what stays behind as we move on. So it's another moment of choice. But I think it's interesting that we're working with corpses here. We're working with what has already been shed away. And I think that being able to take stock like that helps us to be more awake, right? Just like the title Awakening would suggest, be more awake and present in our lives, and not just be going through the motions of all of these changes, but really analyzing and understanding so that we can make better choices for ourselves instead of what's better for the people around us, or for some maybe indoctrinated standards that have been imposed on us, subconsciously throughout our lives. I mean, it happens to all of us. And it's really hard to have these judgment moments and to really understand that we don't have to take it all with us. And some of the stuff we were forced to leave behind, we might really miss. Does that make sense, Cecily?
Yeah, I think so. And because this card precedes the world, I have read this card in just like a kind of literal way in a certain context when, it comes up as a challenge, like sometimes in a weird family dynamic. Sometimes it will speak like that, but I think the flavor you're talking about is much more prominent. And because it does precede the world, which is our card of kind of being rounded out, as Claire will describe, I think this is that kind of I've used it to talk about spiritual awakenings, or kind of reconnecting with something on the other side, whether it's just an energy, a love of nature, or, starting to use tarot, maybe coming into contact with that other dimension and what it means to you.
Yeah, I like that. I like the sort of idea of the crossroads, which I don't know if it's looking into it too much to see that in the flag, but as opposed to thinking of that as an actual cross, because it's really not in the shape of a cross. It's more of a crossroads shape. I don't know. That just came to me, but
yeah, I like that. This is like an opportunity to open things up even further, but with kind of venturing into unknown places.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Speaking of unknown places, the World card. This one really gets me. So it's the last card of the major arcana, and so it ends the sequence that is fondly known as the Fool's Journey for us. And I think for me, on a personal level, this card feels inaccessible, largely because of the sort of loftiness of its goal in the Fool's Journey. It's like a full synthesis of the self, right? We've gone through this whole journey, and we've been able to, like you said, to be rounded out in this way where body, mind, and soul are in perfect harmony. I think in a way it does something to my brain, like the 10 of Cups does, where I look at it and my first instinct is always, this isn't real. But I actually think that's like, that's really illuminating in terms of what the card can do, because like 10 of Cups, it shows me like what I think I am and am not capable of. And it can really help me understand like why I'm resistant to even the idea of being like a whole, fully synthesized person. Another thing about this card is it's all encompassing. It literally holds the world within its awareness. We have like the four corners of the zodiac there, and this sort of divine floating figure. And so they're offering the world to us in a way, right? They're sort of opening us up to greater possibilities, and there's kind of a limitlessness to it, I would say. And coming back to the tens from the minors, the world is the end of this great cycle. It is a card that sparks the beginning of a new cycle. And so much like a 10, this particular card is about what has already come to fruition. So what doors are being opened up that can lead us back to the Fool? So kind of like Cecily said earlier about when the Tower comes up, I always think of the Star. When the World comes up, I always think of the Fool, like where am I sort of stepping out of my maturity maybe in a particular area and walking back into this beginner's mind and starting fresh over. It's a really cool card. I definitely feel like I learn a little bit more about it at each time it's pulled.
I like the relationship you're describing with the Fool, and in the Fool card, his number is 0, and it's written like up there where the Roman numerals are. But if you put these side by side, you can think about the camera kind of like zooming in on that 0, and it contains like this figure, this kind of potential for his evolution. And it's like the world is a destiny in a way, if you can kind of find your way toward it. And when I see this card, it seems like a reminder that you're doing the right things and making some choices that help the body, mind, soul parts of you travel along their purpose. Like you're starting to figure out what you want to be, what you want to bring to the world, and you're doing the things that would support that. And then I see a question from Adrian. Can you speak briefly about the significance of the figures in the corners? And I believe they represent the cardinal signs
of the zodiac, yeah.
But under a slightly different framework than the one we use.
Yeah. Can you briefly speak? Oh, that's her question. Yeah. So I've heard it described as like the 4 cornerstones of the zodiac. And I think I'm not super, so I'll just say a disclaimer, I'm not super well versed in astrology, but I do think it's interesting that we all have all signs in our chart. And so these sort of 4 cornerstones, or like the foundation of the zodiac, like all being represented in symmetry here, maybe suggests another type of like an astrological balance in the self. I do not know if that is accurate, but it's an idea.
I like that because I think it reinforces my idea that like your chart was cast when you showed up here on this planet in this body, and you're traveling through that map, that energetic map, and here it's containing the body, mind, and soul. I'll just add real quick, last thing, that the wand she's holding is the one we see in the Magician card, and instead of it kind of being held up to the cosmos to grab that energy, she not only has one, she has two, and she seems to be in control of
Yes.
how the energy works.
Yeah, it's like the magician is trying to call in some kind of divine energy, and it feels like she sort of is that, or is embodying it. And I guess the phrase that came, not to be too dorky and literary, but the phrase that came to mind when we were talking about the zodiac symbols is "I contain multitudes." And so I wonder if that's kind of an idea too about those figures as all being sort of like the different heads or representations of the self.
And I see one comment from Katie mentioning the tetramorph, and suggesting we kind of look that up. And so we can throw that in an email.
Cool. I love it.
Katie.
That's awesome. All right. So here's a little image of all of our cards together. And I don't know if you'll have your cards in front of you. But if you do, we're going to work with these just a little bit here in a sec. So these are the cards we're going to be working with. So before we jump into writing a little more, I wanted to read y'all this poem, also from that same collection I referenced earlier. This is a full poem. Like I said, they're prose poems. I feel like they're very accessible. So even if maybe you're not a super huge poetry person, perhaps these might be an entryway for you into poetry. But it's really lovely. And I will read it for you now. So her poems in this collection are numbered. And again, it's from Absolute Solitude. And this is 32, if my Roman numerals are correct. Yesterday, I wanted to climb the mountain and my body said no. Today, I wanted to ponder the sea, to go down to the shimmering bay, and my body said no. I am baffled by this dark resistance, this inertia that resists my will from I don't know where and holds me back, wielding shackles to my feet. Until now, I have walked many roads, never realizing that it was my feet that carried me. I took in landscapes, never knowing if they entered through my eyes or if I already carried them within me long before they appeared on the horizon. I nourished stars, dreams, and souls, never noticing that my own veins were being emptied of their generous blood. Now I ask myself what star will come to drip itself into my exhausted heart, and to what fountain will I be led where I can drink like a weary animal? I ask myself what I will do here on earth with this worthless, defiant body, and I hear my body answer, what will I do with this spark that believed itself the sun, and this breath that believed itself the wind? I really love this poem. I read it and immediately knew I wanted to share it with y'all because I feel like there are so many tarot cards in this poem. I see, I would say at least 4, and several of the ones that we worked with. And if anybody has anything they want to comment about the poem or ask, now would be the time before we get to writing. But I think we definitely see the star in the 4th and 5th paragraphs, or stanzas rather. Even though we didn't talk about the devil, I see the devil in the 3rd stanza, welding shackles to my feet. I feel like there's a little bit of a hermit vibe in here as well. I wanted to climb the mountain and my body said no. Well, thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, I think this poet speaks the tarot language and then some. And I love how this extrapolates or makes into art that difference between the body, mind, and soul, and how they are one and how they are not, and how
Mm.
they bring gifts and how they frustrate us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's so great is the poem ends on a question and it doesn't give us a resolution. And I feel like that's an important thing to note as we go through, like, what are these cards working towards? What are our goals and all of this synthesis? And really, like, as we walk through our lives, there's just these moments where we're kind of feeling all of these feelings and going through an experience where it's all kind of mashed together and it's very hard to parse out. And I really appreciate that. I think that tarot helps me parse things out a little bit, but um, I also love that kind of moon card quality of just sort of the chaos of it. Okay. So if y'all are ready, I have a little writing exercise. So we're going to start with one of the cards of transformation that we've been talking about tonight. And I want you all to go ahead and choose your own card that you want to work with and write about. As you're choosing, feel free to challenge yourself if you want to choose one that you don't get or you feel really resistant to, or that you maybe hate a little bit. But also definitely be gentle with yourself if that's more of your vibe tonight. Whatever is speaking to you the most right now, I would say, is definitely a good card to go with. So we're going to hand select our own card to start. And we're going to write for about 3 minutes on this first prompt before we move on to the next part. So once you've got your card, the phrase, which is kind of a mutation of one of the lines from Dulce's poem, is, "This card asks of me." So choose your card, and we're going to write for 3 or 4 minutes using the mantra, "This card asks of me." To begin the next sequence in the prompt, you can choose from your full deck if you like. So if you want to shuffle your transformation cards back in, that's okay. If you really want to stay working with just these cards, you're welcome to. I'm going to shuffle mine in and work from the full deck. And we're going to draw a card for each of the following phrases. So we're primarily working with the first card. And so for the second one, you draw a card, and the question for this card is, and I hear my body answer. So we're going to meditate on how the body's answer is correlating with the image and the story of the card that you pull at random from your deck or from your stack of transformation cards. We're going to write again for about 3 minutes on this first one, and then we'll move to the next one. All right, so we're also going to draw a card from the deck at random for the second part of this half of the prompt, and I hear my mind answer. So we're kind of creating a spread as we go, and the writing hopefully is developing in an organic way. No pressure to make it into like a reading, but sort of a meditation and a reading and a writing prompt all in one. So for our third card, and I hear my body answer. And we can go ahead and move on to the third answer. And I hear my soul answer, and you can also draw your last card. got about a minute left if you want to go ahead and wrap up this final part. All right, if y'all are ready to wrap up the writing, I'd be curious to know what card you chose to work with at the beginning of the set that we've been kind of thinking about tonight. So if y'all want to share in the chat what card you chose, maybe why you chose it, and if you would like to share part of your writing, you are absolutely welcome to do that. I know that's not what we're all available to do, but we always love it when y'all want to share with us what you wrote.
This is Cecily. I picked up my deck and I thought, the first transformation card I see, that'll be my card. And that was the Tower. Mm. And my soul answers in that final category, I got the Devil. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a lot written about it, but I just thought, I'm still mulling over what that means. It's a really interesting triangulation. So
yeah, for sure. The Devil is definitely a card that could have been on our list tonight, you know?
Yeah, he definitely can lead to some transformation. Let's see, there's a couple people commenting. Jess chose the Ten of Wands because it feels so much like where I've been and the mindset I'm in, wanting to lay things down to make room for my passions.
Mm. So good.
Great. Kara chose the Moon because it is the most difficult thing for me to face my deepest fears. I'm an excellent runner. I love that. The geographic cure is good.
Yeah.
Good to try. Ellen chose Judgment, the Awakening card. I've been meditating, hearing a lot about not striving to be someone else, but returning to myself. It's really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then Katie says, I chose at random the Ten of Swords. I think it came up for me because my thoughts are the hardest thing for me to get control of. I can definitely relate to that.
Looks like Adrienne chose Eight of Cups. She says, this card asked me to take my journey away from comfort and ease of people-pleasing relationships with my family into the harder journey to truth. Yeah, I'm feeling that a lot right now. This, the pandemic brings up so much more than what is on the surface in terms of keeping our bodies safe and complying with, all of the pieces of being a good citizen. There's so much more to it. Feel a lot of Ten of Swords and Eight of Cups. Yeah, I chose the Moon because I feel like that's the card I've been going through the most lately, and working with fear and pride, and just acknowledging that, yeah, I am scared, and that's I'd much rather tell people a story about how I'm actually fine, but it's not true.
I think it's really bringing so many parts of life into really stark relief, especially, yeah, we're just kind of in closer to proximity to the way our life is constructed, and we have time to like look around and notice. So I hear a lot of like desire for change and a lot of like deep reflection happening for people.
Yeah. I think it's great to lean into it, knowing that it's happening to us, whether we like it or not, and to try to use that force that's already kind of running through our current time on Earth. Let's see. I wanted to leave a little space for questions, and to just look back at the cards another time. So there they are. And if y'all want to ask us questions in the chat, you're welcome to. Or just further sort of reflections on what you may have discovered or have known about these cards coming in.
Adrian is asking about the deck, and this is the Rider-Waite deck, the very traditional, also now called the Smith Rider-Waite deck because of the artist Pamela Coleman Smith. It came out in 1910 and then became, I think, more popular in the 60s and 70s when our boomer friends were getting physical, and there's just a lot written about it. It's a good deck to learn with, but it is also somewhat limited. And then Kara is new to tarot. Would you have a recommendation for a resource or book for beginners?
I started with 78 Degrees of Wisdom, and it can be a little academic. I will say that, but I think it's extremely thoughtful, and it gives you a really good baseline for kind of developing your own intuitive knowing of the cards. She definitely goes into a lot of numerology and symbology, and even at the end, like after we've gone through the whole deck, she gives like examples of some classic spreads and how to give a reading. I thought it was really, really helpful. I have it on my nightstand. I still look at that book when I need some information. How about you, Cecily?
Yeah, I particularly like the part of that book that describes the major arcana and their reflection of the soul's development over the course of a lifetime. That was probably the most enlightening thing I came across in my early learning. And there's some podcasts I really liked that sometimes focus on individual cards.
Yeah.
There's one called Fortune's Wheelhouse, which does get super esoteric because they also talk about the Aleister Crowley deck and one of the decks that one of the women on the podcast created. But the other one is Between the Worlds. They've been doing a series on individual cards. They do a great job.
And if, I guess, just thinking about another type of resource, the site isn't really active right now, I don't think, but it's called Little Red Tarot. First of all, she has a shop, and you can shop decks there, and she has a lot of the indie decks that are out there, and you can kind of browse them, and it's a really cool little like small store that I think is worth supporting. But I think she's in the UK, so that may be problematic, but she also had, it's like I said, I don't think it's active anymore, but the posts are still up on her blog. And she is like a queer witch, and a lot of her, I think, like guest written articles are from other queer witches and, people of color who are writing about tarot. And so it's super inclusive and really gets like a lot of great angles and perspectives and voices about tarot. I really appreciate that as like kind of a database of a bunch of different people talking and writing about tarot. Oh yeah, so that's, I don't know if I said it, littleredtarot.com.
Any other questions? One thing I'll point out while you might be typing, the towers that you see in the moon can also be seen in the background of the death card. So it's almost like that figure in the death card will ultimately venture down a path that will show up in more zoomed in kind of in the moon card, which is something to think about.
Yeah, that is really cool. Let's see what we have on the next slide here. Oh yeah, I wanted to leave you all with a few questions, maybe if you are interested in using your deck a little bit for like transformative questions, or to keep this topic in mind going forward. So these are some ideas of you can kind of create your own spread around some of these questions, or even just do a 1-card draw. Or sometimes I'll just do a 3-card draw because I like the symmetry of it. So yeah, asking questions like, what is the cocoon that I'm shedding away and leaving behind? How can I be with the discomfort of change? How can I welcome something new into my life? Or how can I stay centered in who I am as everything else around me changes? So I tried to keep the, caterpillar becoming a butterfly cliche to a minimum, but you get this one nice little image of it.
Yeah, these are all great questions for transformation.
I really like doing 1-card draws. I know that sometimes they leave you wanting a little more, but I love the meditation of using a single card to kind of work through something. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Jess. Jess says, this was so informative. Love these deep dives on a theme. Awesome. Super fun. Super honored to get to share this with y'all. I'm so glad y'all came tonight. If we are good on this slide, I'm going to move it over, and we can also maybe include those questions in our email, Cecily.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, cool. So thank you all so much for coming. And here's a little bit about what we have coming up next. I'm going to let Cecily talk about these things.
Yes, we will follow up with an email with some of the like book recommendations and podcasts and other little tidbits. The questions that Claire mentioned, we'll include those. And of course, if you're on our mailing list, you'll get more spreads and writing and reflection inspiration periodically. We have 2 cool events coming up. We're doing a live tarot Q&A on Wednesday, May 27th at 7 p.m. And so to that, you can bring any kind of tarot question, basic or complicated. You can even talk about a short spread that you tried that kind of puzzled you, and we can kind of work through that as a group. And no one is obligated to share, but it's just a resource to kind of help you develop your own practice. We're also doing our 2nd edition of what we call Book Coven, which is a book club that focuses on books that deal in the metaphysical and the woo and the witchy. And our next one is this novel called Melmoth by Sarah Perry. And it has at its center a woman who's a translator, and she's kind of living in exile. And at first you don't really know why. And she gets introduced slowly to this concept of Melmoth, who's like this haunting woman who watches, and it's connected to Czech folklore. So I'm really enjoying it, and I think we're gonna have a cool conversation. And we're also going to be announcing a 4-part class starting in June on Wednesday evenings, and each class will cover a different figure in the court card. So the pages, the knights, the queens, and the kings. And we're going to kind of be queering those different figures. So not just understanding what the traditional meanings might be, but kind of creating our own characters for them so that we know them more by heart. And then if you're not following us on Instagram or the social medias, you can find us at that Typewriter Tarot handle. And I also want to tell you that soon we'll be launching a membership program, and we're hoping to offer, kind of create more community in that membership space, and also deliver a lot more material for you, like guided tarot meditations with a spread built in, and a writing guide or a writing prompt, or a recorded tarot demo video where we walk you through a real life reading and explain how we would interpret it. And certain members at some levels will get access to class recordings for free. So I just wanted to plant that seed, and now would be a great time if something like membership would be interesting to you, to let us know, like, oh, I would love to get this if I were a member, because we're still kind of shaping that. So yeah, just keep an eye out. And we are so glad that you came tonight. Y'all are part of our wonderful community, and it feels so great to spend time with you and talk about tarot. And Claire, you did a beautiful job as ever teaching.
Thank you. I really love, I love these classes, and I'm so glad we get to have them, even though we can't all be in the same room together. So I really appreciate y'all tuning in tonight.